So at the age of 5, Daniel had been removed from his mother's care and was placed with his aunt and uncle, Terry and Leon, who were the defendants in this case. Initially, everything was great, and then when it became obvious that they were going to fully adopt him and there would be no more social workers checking in on him, Terry started abusing Daniel. During that period of time, she started physically abusing him and also would restrain him to his bed using handcuffs, with his bunk bed to his ankle, so that he wouldn't be able to get food during the day. Daniel was so hungry that he started stealing lunches from other kids at school. And in order to avoid additional scrutiny or other people's eyes on Daniel, Terry decided to keep him home and homeschooled him. He was 8 by the time the food deprivation and the handcuffing started. So Stephen is cousins with Terry. He was visiting for Cinco de Mayo. So he went into the bedroom to check on Daniel to see if he wanted breakfast. And Daniel told him he was hungry, but he couldn't come out.
When I first walked in there, I could sense something was wrong. Daniel was sort of not responsive to what was going on, and then all the kids went to go get breakfast.
So Stephen, being a father of a young child himself, I think immediately sensed that something was not quite right, and he spent quite a bit of time with Daniel, building rapport and talking with him and playing guitars with him and getting him to trust him, frankly, which without that, Daniel would have never confided in him.
Daniel said, "Can I show you something and you promise you won't tell?" And I said, "Sure, of course you can."
So Daniel lifted the blanket that was covering him and showed Stephen the handcuffs that were around his ankle, attaching him to the bed. Stephen did what probably any of us would have done, which was kind of initially sort of freak out a little bit.
Fear, shock.
But he kept his head about him and he never let Daniel know that he was troubled.
I looked him in the eye, I made him look at me, I said, "Adults can't do this to you. If I take you, will you come with me? I won't let this happen to you again." And he said yes.
As Stephen was looking around for, I believe, Daniel's shoes, he opened the closet, and in the closet he found an 8-month-old baby in a car seat. And that baby was a daycare baby, so Terry also ran a daycare out of her home. And he remained very calm, then he thought about what to do, and he figured out a plan to get Daniel out of there. Daniel was very, very bright, and at some point he had figured out a way to actually pick the handcuff lock.
So he was ready to go. We grabbed his shoes, I grabbed him, carried him, and ran.
And they ran for about a mile to a Wendy's restaurant where Stephen got Daniel something to eat and started calling the authorities.
And then we got him some more food.
So Daniel was emaciated by the time he was rescued. He could barely walk because his ankles had been handcuffed to the bed for so long that it hurt to walk. He had a distended belly from all the food he ate in the first 24 hours just trying to catch up. He rarely made eye contact. He looked like the light had been turned off inside of him. Stephen's testimony was critical to this case. There was a lot of testimony or suggestion at the defense part that Daniel was somehow this troubled child who was lying about what happened, who was making things up, who was hurting himself to make it look like they were hurting him. And I think Stephen, being sort of an eyewitness at that critical moment in time, really corroborated a lot of what Daniel said, and the jurors were able to use that testimony to really substantiate Daniel's claims. So one defendant who was largely responsible for the physical application of force and the handcuffing of Daniel was sentenced to 15 years, 4 months to life in prison. And the other defendant who stood by and allowed it to happen received 6 years state prison.
It's not always easy to do the right thing, but I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to do that, and I know that it was the right thing. So.
I nominated Stephen because I firmly believe that on May 6, 2012, he saved Daniel's life. But for Stephen intervening at that moment, I think that Daniel would have died. He is a very special child, Daniel. He's very, very special and brilliant and sweet and loving, despite the inhumane treatment he received at the hands of Terry and Leon. He's doing amazingly well. He's been adopted by a phenomenal family. So Daniel immediately came to mind as a citizen of courage. I think Daniel showed incredible courage, standing up by himself to testify against his abusers. He was alone in this to a large extent. He had no family support, except for his new family, which came along after the fact. But Daniel has made such incredible progress with his life, and he's made a new life for himself. We all acknowledge the courage that it took for him to come forward, but I'd like to recognize Stephen for helping make that happen.